Story time about the girl next door. So around the time I lived in New York with my sister and dad, across the street there was a girl. I never knew her name, but she was really pretty. I had to be 11 and her herself maybe 15, 16. I was always playing outside, and ever so often she came out to take a baby for a stroll. Back then it never really occurred to me that she was a teen mom. Truthfully, I thought that baby was her little sister. And the baby would cry all the time, and she could never get the baby to quiet down. The guy she lived with, which I believe was her dad, would get mad at her when she couldn't quiet the baby down. There was a particular night after 4th of July, the baby was crying, and again she couldn't get the baby to stop crying. At that time I was outside jumping rope, and I heard a slap and a pound against the door, and the baby stopped crying. I was scared that something happened to the baby, but come back for part 2 so I could tell you guys what happened. Part 2 of the girl that lived next door. So like I said, the baby was crying, and in the middle of the night I heard a slap and a pound against the door, and the baby stopped crying. I was afraid that something had happened to the baby, so I ran across the street and I listened to the sounds behind the front door. The guy that lived there had opened the door and I fell into the house. He yelled at me saying, "What are you doing on my property?" When I got up and I looked up, the baby was on the ground and the girl had bruises on her face. I told him I was sorry and I asked what happened to the baby. He yelled at me, telling me to get out, and the girl got up to pick the baby up, and the baby started crying again. I got scared and ran back across the street. And the next day, the man came back and knocked on my door. Come back for part 3. Part 3 of the girl that lived next door. So like I said, the man came back and knocked on my door. My sister had answered, and he asked my dad, but around that time my dad wasn't home, so he just left. From then on, I was kind of afraid of going outside because I was afraid that the man was going to see me, so for a whole week, I never came out. When I finally decided to go out, I asked my sister to come with me and play jump rope. While we were outside playing jump rope, our neighbors across the street, 2nd floor, blinds opened, and I looked up because the blinds are never open. As we were looking, the words "help me" were on the window, and which appeared to be written in red lipstick. We got scared and told our dad, and my dad immediately called the police, but after the police visited, they told my dad that there wasn't anyone in there. No baby, no girl, just a man living across the street. Said maybe we were seeing things or reading things wrong. It gets really bad after this. Come back for part 4. Part 4 about the girl that lived across the street. I think maybe a month after the incident, I stopped seeing the girl and I stopped hearing the baby. And I kind of stopped thinking about them for a while. I thought maybe her and her little sister moved with their mom and left the guy who I thought which was their dad. I'd say that next year I finally saw the girl, but this time she was much skinnier. She had came up to me and asked me if I seen her daughter. I said no, and she walked away. I was confused at first because I didn't know that baby was hers. Then years later, it was my prom night. Before I took a step out of my house, I seen out my window that an entire police SWAT team came to arrest my neighbor. Then they went into the house and there were multiple girls. Had to be like 8 of them coming out of his house, and some of the girls looked really weak. Lastly, there was a little girl and she had to be like 6, 7, and I thought it was crazy, like how did all those girls get in there? To this day, I wonder what happened to the girl next door and if she ever found her baby.
What's an opinion you have that might piss some people off?
Girls are not more mature than boys. And before y'all start calling me a pick-me, let me just explain why. Girls are not more mature than boys. Society just allows boys to be immature. We have to stop using the excuse, boys mature slower than girls, for bad behavior. Listen, I know a lot of smart boys out there. They're not stupid. They're not stupid. They're so smart that they even know themselves. They know what they're doing. It's like, that's why the expectations for men is like at the bare minimum. Like, what can you expect from a person that's really not that mature? When a guy does something stupid, don't look at it, oh, he's just not mature. No, let him take accountability. He knows what he's doing. And before anyone talks about, oh, girls physically mature faster, no, y'all just see women as sexual objects. Y'all will do anything to make a woman feel like she has more responsibility over things that she shouldn't be responsible over. If you guys want more tea, I will make a video under somebody's comment. Am I wrong for breaking up my best friend's relationship with her boyfriend? Some people may say it was petty, but I think it was justice. So my best friend at the time, which we're going to call Coco, had a boyfriend, and we're going to call him Nick. They met in high school their junior year, and they were together for about 2 years. Nick was seriously in love with Coco. He would literally do everything for her. Honestly, Nick was like her little puppet. Honestly, throughout the relationship, I felt as though Coco really didn't respect Nick. I mean, the things that he did for her, I wish a man would do for me. And I just really felt like she didn't really appreciate him. If I was in a relationship with Nick, the relationship would have been mutual. I seriously believe that Nick deserved better because Coco wouldn't do anything. She literally added no value to the relationship, but Nick, he would buy her things, took her shopping, went on dates, went on trips, and Coco had nothing to show for it. So I made a plan to steal her man, and in the next part, I'll tell you exactly why I decided to make that choice. Part 2 on why I decided to steal my best friend's man. So like I said, the relationship between Coco and Nick wasn't mutual. Coco seriously did not deserve him. In the process of their entire relationship, Coco was cheating on Nick. And as a best friend, I tried to keep it cordial, but I just didn't like how Nick was getting treated, especially with all the things that he was doing for her. And you won't even believe the person that she was cheating on Nick with. My crush. And she knew that was my crush. She tried to hide the fact that she was talking to him, but I ended up finding out through mutual friends. I never confronted Coco about it because I just wanted to see if she would be honest with me. But for weeks, she never did. So one day I decided to go to Nick's house and I practically told him what it was. At first he didn't believe me, but then once he realized me out of all people would come to him about the situation, he understood and felt heartbroken. So we created a plan to hurt Coco. Come back for part 3. Part 3 on why I decided to steal my best friend's man. So like I said, I went to his house and told him that Coco was cheating on him. And all necessary, I really don't know what Coco was doing with my crush, but I heard from other people that she was talking to him. And honestly, that was enough information for me. And we decided to plan a romantic sneaky link and invite her an hour later. In the process of us doing this, I didn't expect anything to happen, but it did. And I don't know if he expected anything to happen that night, but he practically ended up cheating on Coco with me. Later that night, when she finally arrived, Nick told her she actually needed to go home and that he was busy doing something, even though he invited her to come over. She felt something was off, so she ran upstairs to his bedroom, which was where I was. When she saw me, she yanked me by my hair and pulled me out of the bed. And the rest was history. I ended up finding out 2 weeks later after that incident, the only reason why she was talking to my crush was to get him with me. During Halloween, someone asked me if I ever had a paranormal experience, and I told them no because I was in disbelief of ghosts, and I was actually going through paranormal things at my house for years. I denied it to keep calm, but now that I moved, I feel comfortable enough to speak on the creepy things that went down. So back in 1995, my dad had passed away, and my mom felt very uncomfortable being in our house, so we moved closer to family. I believe at the time I had to be 7, 8, and my brother was a teenager. The new house we moved in was very cold, not just physically, but in a sense emotionally cold. Well, that's how it felt to me. The floors cracked every time you walked, and the doors would make squeak noises. The first week, my brother would play around my door and scare me, but one night, in the middle of the night, I get a knock on my door. I ignored it thinking it was my brother, and then I heard another knock and it woke me up. I got up to tell my brother to leave me alone. But when I opened up the door, there was nobody there. Come back for part 2. Part 2 of my paranormal experience. So if you don't believe in unknown spirits, you can skip this. So like I said earlier, when I opened my door, nobody was there. I ran to my brother's room. He was asleep, so it was no way it was him. Next morning, I told my mom about it, and she assured me that ghosts weren't real. Anyways, a month later, weird things started happening to me. I started waking up in weird areas. The corner of my floor, the bathroom, and even my brother's room. He started to get weirded out and thought I was doing it on purpose, but I told him I didn't know how I got there. So that night, I begged him to stay in his room because I was scared. The next morning, I woke up to my brother staring at me. He said, "I think you sleepwalk, but you weren't really walking. You more so was dragging yourself. I saw you trying to leave the room. I called you and asked where you were going, but you weren't responding. And then you started floating in the air." I know this all sounds really crazy, but I'll explain it in part 3. Part 3 of my paranormal experience. So my brother told me that I was sleepwalking, and then I started floating in the air. My stomach dropped and I felt so scared. Then, in the middle of me fearing my own body, my brother bust out laughing. I asked him, "What's funny?" He was like, "I was messing with you." And I moved towards him and pushed him for scaring me like that. He was like, "I had to. You were so scared." And then I laid back in the bed so relieved. But then he said, "You didn't float, but you definitely were sleepwalking. It explains why you wake up in my room." I was slightly confused because I've never walked in my sleep. Heck, I didn't even know sleepwalking was a real thing. I thought it was just something that they did in the movies. That day when my mom got back from work, I told her and she agreed to take me to the doctor's one of these days. After a couple weeks, I completely stopped popping up in weird places, meaning I stopped sleepwalking. At least that's what I thought. I thought this whole paranormal thing was in my head until I had a near-death experience. But something saved me, and I'll explain it in part 4. Part 4 of my paranormal experience. A couple months later, when I started school, I started having dreams about my dad. It'd be him preparing me for school, home making me lunch, helping me pick out clothes. But then I'd wake up from the dream and I realized that he wasn't actually there. It really saddened me, and it kept happening. I'd have that same dream over and over, and it went on for weeks. Then suddenly, I had a dream that the house we used to live in caught on fire. But in this dream, I could see myself, which felt weird. My dad had got up and started waking everyone up and telling them to go outside and leave. But when he got to me, I wasn't waking up. He kept shaking me to wake up. I'd think he'd pick me up to take me outside, but he was seriously just shaking me to wake up. He started crying, and I've never seen my dad cry, just telling me to please wake up. Then he screamed at me and said, "Wake up!" And the scream was so loud that it actually woke me out of my dream. When I opened my eyes, I must have been sleepwalking because I was one step away from falling down the stairs.